In Pakistan, if you want to become a freight driver, the entry barrier is relatively low. Of course, you'll need to have a truck first. If you're short on funds, you can buy one with a slightly smaller size. If during your daily transport process, the vehicle cannot meet your equipment needs, you can approach the Pakistani Brothers for a modification, turning the vehicle into a customized one. This kind of customized freight vehicle is not permitted in our country, but with Pakistani Brothers, it's completely fine. Hello, I am Tony, and I welcome you to Tony Industry channel. Today's video brings you the modification of a Pakistani Brothers truck. Why is it called a reconstruction? Well, this truck is quite new and probably hasn't traveled many miles yet. Why did they choose to reconstruct it? It's because the driver of this truck is very dissatisfied with its current light truck load capacity. Sometimes, when transporting lighter items like foam boxes, paper boxes, and other non-heavy goods, this vehicle's load capacity falls short of his requirements. So, this owner found the Pakistani Brothers Automobile Modification Factory, and that's precisely what it is, a real modification factory. Originally, this truck's length was about 6.8 meters, but after the Pakistani Brothers overhaul, it was extended directly to around 9.6 meters. I say, around 9.6 meters, but I can't be entirely sure, but it's certainly much longer than it was before modification. The first thing they had to modify was the vehicle's main beam. It needed to be stronger to bear the load, so they underwent the necessary modifications. Next, let's take a look at this episode of Pakistani Brothers' automobile creation process and how they did it. Firstly, the main beam had to be processed. The original main beam, when adjusted to this length, didn't meet the required load-bearing capacity and thickness. So, Pakistani Brothers used a simple and straightforward method. They removed the original main beam, covered it with an additional layer, and I think that's acceptable. But looking at the material used for the additional layer, it seems quite ordinary, though it's thicker. Undoubtedly, its strength doesn't match that of the original main beam. As you can see in the details, the original main beam is wrapped inside, and then an extra layer is added. Then, they use a powerful hydraulic press for correction. Some of you might say, wait, didn't you say it got extended? Where is it extended? Don't worry, we'll see the extension right away. Ah, here it is, this rusted and yellowish section, that's the extension. It looks like it's about 3 meters long, and it's a double-layered structure, just extended by welding. The original main beam is wrapped inside, and afterward, they have to process these holes. Don't doubt that these holes would affect the beam's strength. On the contrary, these arc-shaped holes actually enhance the beam's strength. I think it has something to do with the mechanical principles of arc shapes, but I'm not entirely sure. Anyway, they have to process all the holes according to the holes on the original main beam. Of course, they don't have to recreate every hole, as some of them serve no purpose. Most of the holes are for fixing pipelines, covers, fuel tanks, and other small accessories. So, it's not a problem to leave out some of the holes. The method of drilling holes is quite special, using a wooden stick to press the electric drill directly downward. As we can see from the details in the video, the additional layer is much thicker than the original main beam. As mentioned before, despite this extra layer being thicker, its strength might not match that of the original main beam's strength. However, these truck main beams not only need to be hard but also have some flexibility. If they were too light, the truck would break when loading goods and shaking during transportation due to twisting forces. So, it needs to have some flexibility. After all, with this additional length and the double-layered beams, it should be fine. Next, they have to weld the 2 layers of wrapped beams together because we can't have it running around with 2 layers of skin, that would be troublesome. Once the dual beams are securely welded, the next step is the installation of some auxiliary accessories, fixing them onto the main beams of the truck body. For instance, the engine is placed on this main beam, as well as the gearbox. So, the front installation position must be precise. On this reinforced section of the main beam, you can see many small holes, which are the mounting positions for the engine. It's raining outside, and Pakistani Brothers' truck is under basic conditions, somewhat crude, but fortunately, there are no leaks. Now, they will proceed with installing the engine, its brackets, and gearbox brackets, all of which is a somewhat intricate task. In the middle of this work, some might have doubts: with the truck's length changed, wouldn't the driving wheels end up in an awkward position? Wouldn't it be a problem when loaded with goods and cause innovation and trouble? Well, Pakistani Brothers must have considered this issue, so there's no need to worry. Now, let me measure the overall length of this main beam. From this point to here, and then forward to this position, it's up to where the Pakistani Brothers' hand is. This will give us an estimation of the length. So, how long is the total assembly of this truck? Let's just say, in my opinion, it might be around 7.2 or 8 meters, it's hard to say precisely. However, one thing is sure. The length of this truck compared to the original one won't exceed 6 meters. It might even be a light truck of around 4.2 meters, but this is just a guess. Regardless, small trucks with engines around 45 horsepower are still quite powerful, so there's no need to worry about the power. It won't have any issues unless loaded with stones. Now, they need to determine the position to install the steel plate spring. They have to ensure the alignment of the main beam and perform the welding directly on top. I'm worried that if the Pakistani Brothers' truck comes out with mismatched wheelbases, it would be quite funny. But don't worry, they should be experienced with this modification method, so such a situation is unlikely to occur. Alright, let's continue. After fixing some small accessories, they'll move on to assemble the crossbeam and weight. This step is crucial in the truck's modification process. If the crossbeam and weight are not securely fixed, interesting problems may arise during later use. Why would I know about this? When I used to work in the automotive repair industry in the past, there was a 97-year-old Northwest King. Speaking of this Northwest King, many friends might find the name quite unfamiliar. What brand of truck is it? Well, it's actually a 7.2-meter long Jiffong bridge truck. But its color is rather peculiar. It's not the familiar blue we used to see on Jiffong trucks, it's a very deep blue. In the hometown, there used to be quite a few of these monotonous Northwest Kings, but now, you probably won't see them anymore, as most of them have likely been phased out and scrapped. The issue with this truck was that the beam and weight had some problems with their fixed connection, which eventually caused the beam to twist and form a parallelogram. Can you imagine such a situation? So, the fixed position between the beam and weight is crucial. The assembling process of my Pakistani brothers had reached the step of connecting the beam and weight. Generally speaking, if you want to modify the beam and weight of this truck, it's best to dismantle and install a thicker triangular iron piece in the connection between the beam and weight, which will strengthen its structure. But I don't know how my Pakistani brothers dealt with it. They might have directly welded it together, which is highly possible. Let's continue and see how my Pakistani brothers completed the installation. Have you noticed the density of this beam? I was worried before that the strength might not be sufficient after the beam's modification, but now it seems that my worries were completely unnecessary. With this kind of beam modification, I reckon it can withstand whatever load the tires can handle. Alright, next, in order to secure the beam, my Pakistani elder brother took out a special clamping tool to secure the gap between the weight and the beam. Then, they can proceed with the fixation. However, it seems that my Pakistani brothers have decided not to use rivets or bolts for the fixation. They opted for a simple and forceful method, directly welding it together. There are advantages and disadvantages to using electric welding. As you all know, there will be a certain amount of torsion in the heavy beam when carrying cargo, so the welded part needs to be more flexible and a bit more brittle than the steel itself. This situation is inevitable. Actually, bolts and rivets also have their advantages. But we won't go into detail about that. Let's focus on the final outcome. How does this modified beam look? It seems to have a touch of special toughness, as if it was forged from the finest steel. My Pakistani brothers, thinking that the beam and weight were properly connected, were all sweaty and done with it. It doesn't seem to be the case here. They made a hole here and then used a car for heating. It looks like they are going to use the hot sum technique for the connection. This hot sum has its pros and cons. Of course, it can easily make some smooth NQ rivets. But, you should pay attention to this detail. During the heating process, the rivet will expand, but once it cools down, the metal will contract. So, using these rivets, especially the hot sum, is not ideal because you probably don't have the equipment for cold riveting. However, it's not completely impossible, it just has its disadvantages. Okay, let's continue reading. After all the parts that needed to be connected were riveted and completed, there's still one more important step. These steps may not seem significant, but they are quite important. It involves using something that feels like atom will, but what exactly it is, I can't really tell. You might call it lazy powder, that's probably what it is. They apply it slightly at the location where the two layers of the big beam connect. It's probably for anti-rust treatment. I won't rule out that it might be some kind of coating or sealant, but it looks more like lazy powder used worldwide. Time flies. A person's lifetime just passes by in the blink of an eye. Just kidding. In reality, the process of modifying this truck has taken 2 days already. Today, they are finally going to install some other key components, such as the front and rear feet, engine transmission parts, steel plates, fuel tank, and other accessories. Once everything is installed, this truck can hit the road. Yes, you heard it right. It will be legal to drive it in this modified state. Honestly, the process of installing these additional parts is quite tedious. So, let's skip those details. Next. Occasionally, let's take a look at this engine. It's a very tiny diesel engine. It feels like a 1-2-3-4 cylinder engine, more like a starter. I hope I didn't misjudge it yesterday. It has a maximum power of 300 horsepower, I feel that's the most it can go. This truck has a 50-liter tank. Now, they are going to hoist the cabin up and install the transmission shaft, cabin, and connect the engine to the various pipelines. Then, the truck will really come to life. But from what we observed in the previous process of pushing that big beam, it can be seen that this small engine and the relatively huge beam don't really match well together. It feels completely out of proportion. Let's see what it looks like after it's all installed. This is the current state once everything is installed. Except for the bumper and some parts that haven't been installed, it can be considered fully assembled. However, I still feel that the distance between the engine and gearbox and the rear drive wheel is quite large. The drive shaft may not be able to reach the bridge. It's possible that it requires 2 sections of the drive shaft to reach the rear feet and add plastic fabric. Yes, it's definitely 2 sections of the drive shaft. Now, let's start the engine and see if it can start successfully. It seems like there are no issues at all. I don't know if you all are familiar with this Isuzu Cleric card, but let me tell you about its engine parameters. However, it's really a bit exaggerated in terms of length. If I add too much, it's possible that the middle beam will have to be removed. I'll keep it short and share up to this point. For those who like this content, don't forget to subscribe Tony Industry channel. Thank you, everyone, for being here with me. See you in the next episode.